All right, everybody, this is going to be part 2 of lesson 2 for unit 2. Catch you right. We looked at congruence. Now we're going to go ahead and look at midpoints. So this should go pretty quick. Midpoints are pretty straightforward. It's kind of the definition of a midpoint's right in its name. The midpoint divides a segment into two congruent segments. So we're talking about a point that's right in the middle in between two other points, so that it's basically right in the middle. That's what a midpoint is. So this problem should look pretty familiar because it's one of the problems similar to a problem on the assignment that you'll see. So we start off the problem that says if Q is the midpoint of PR, so Q is in the middle of P to R, we want to find the value of X. So first of all, if Q is the midpoint, then it divides the segment into two equal parts. So we could actually use congruency to show that basically the distance from P to Q is the same as the distance from R to Q. That's what congruency means, is that those two segments are going to be the same length. Now, because these two segments are the same length, we can say that they're actually equal to each other. So if we set P to Q, which is 7x minus 16, if we set it equal to 4x plus 2, we can then solve this equation for x. So again, just with this fact that we know Q is the midpoint, we know that P to Q is equal to Q to R. Congruent and, in a sense, the same equal length. So if we solve this for x, we would subtract 4x on both sides, and then we would add 16 to both sides, and we're left with 3x equals 18. Divide this out, we should get x equals 6. Now, we could take this a step further, which you will have to do on the assignment. We could take the value of x, which is 6, and plug it in for x here to figure out what the length of P to Q would be. So 6 times 7 is 42, minus 16 is 20. 26. And then if x is 6 here, we could do 6 times 4 is 24 plus 2 is 26. Since they're congruent, they both should end up being 26. All right, let's move on. This is just another example of a problem that's similar to what you'll have to do on the assignment. In this problem, they say that R is the midpoint. That means that the distance from Q to R is the same as the distance from S to R. If R is right in the middle, that means that these segments are congruent. QR is congruent to RS or SR. Because they're congruent, that means that these values or these measures QR is equal to RS. So 5x minus 3 has to equal 21 minus x. And then we'll go ahead and just solve this equation. We would add x to both sides to get 6x minus 3 equals 21. Then we would add 3 to both sides, and then we would divide by 6 to get x equals 4. Now, just like what you have to do on the assignment, they say here that we want to find QS. QS is the entire line here, right? So we can take the value of x, which again was 4, and plug it in for every one of these. So if x is 4, that means that Q to R is 5 times 4 is 20, minus 3 is 17. Now, 21 minus 4 is 17 as well, but again, because these are congruent, they both have to be the same. So if they're both 17, both QR and RS are 17, that means that Q to S has to be 34 because 17 plus 17 is 34. All right, now we're going to look at the midpoint on a coordinate plane. So let's say that we have 2 points plotted on the coordinate plane like this, and they ask you to find the point that's right in the middle between them. Well, the way that we do it is we actually use the midpoint formula, but the formula itself is more like an average. So if you're familiar with statistics or remember like mean, median, and mode, you had to do like an average. So what you do is you add your x's together and you divide by 2, and that'll tell you right where the middle x coordinate should be. Same thing with the y's. You add your y's together, divided by 2. That should tell you where the average or the middle of the y should be. So the way that we would solve this is we would take our x's. So it doesn't matter which point you start off with. I usually go alphabetical order, meaning that my A would be 0.1, B would be 0.2. So that means that this is my x1 and this is my x2. So my setup would be -3 plus 4 because I'm doing my x plus x divided by 2. And then the midpoint is actually a point, so we want to write it as a coordinate. That's why it's a comma here. And then we would take our y's, add them together. So this is my y1, this is my y2. 2 plus a negative 2 is 0. So after we calculate the midpoint here, we should end up with negative 3 plus 4 is a positive 1 divided by 2. So 0.5 or 1/2. So it'd be like right here, and then we'll get 0 for my y. So the midpoint itself is actually right here. Oops. Right here on the line AB. But this is how the midpoint formula works. Let's look at another example here real quick. So the midpoint formula is given to you. We're giving these 2 points, A and B. Now, first thing, it's always a great habit to label your points. If they're not labeled, label them. Once they're labeled, it makes problems a lot easier because you're helping yourself out using this visualization. So here we got A, B. So if I add my x's together, I would do negative 2 plus 5, and then I would divide it by 2. I would take my y's, negative 3 and 2, add them together, negative 3 plus 2, and then divide it by 2. Negative 2 plus 5 is 3. Negative 3 plus 2 is negative 1. So all in all, I should have this point, which is 3 divided by 2 is 1.5, and then negative 1 over 2 is negative 1/2, or negative 0.5. So the midpoint of this line right here, or the distance between A to B, would be right here at 1.5, negative 1.5, or negative 0.5, excuse me. All right, now, you are also going to be required to calculate midpoint without a coordinate plane. And in this case, it's really not much different. It actually might be easier because they actually give you the points labeled already. So if we wanted to figure out what the midpoint is from C to D, again, you just take your x's, add them together, and divide by 2. Negative 2 plus 8. Negative 2 plus 8 is a positive 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 5 plus negative 12 is negative 7. Negative 7 divided by 2 is negative 3.5, and that would be what your midpoint is. Same thing for part B of this example. We have, if we want to figure out what the midpoint of E to F is, we would take our x's, add them together, because that's what the formula says up here, divided by 2, and I should get my x coordinate of negative 1.85. And then you do the same thing for your y's. Negative 7 plus a negative 3.8 is negative 10.8. Divided by 2 is negative 5.4. I really don't think this midpoint stuff is too terribly difficult, but if you have questions about this, please let me know. This is the end of the midpoint video. We are going to move on to distance next.